If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. We have new stories every day. Let's dive in. Hank woke up and saw that his phone had 10 missed calls and the same number of voicemail messages from an unfamiliar number. He didn't recognize the area code, so he called it back a few times. Hank had set his phone to forward unknown numbers to voicemail. Usually, Beijing Betty didn't leave messages. His daughters were not up yet, so he started listening to the messages. That's when he learned that his wife Randy was not in Jacksonville, Florida, visiting her parents and sister for the weekend as she had told him. Instead, she was in the burn unit of a hospital in Boulder, Colorado. Hank paused for a moment. His phone was giving Hank normally liked to keep up with the news, but he'd never bothered to turn off this feature. Something about the headline, "Fire Destroys Boulder Suburb," stuck in his head. He'd seen it on his phone that morning. He went to his phone's homepage and saw the headline, "Devastating Wildfire Destroys Boulder Suburb Overnight." Hank would be the first to admit that sometimes he wasn't the sharpest tool. He was in the shed, but he could think of only one reason his wife Randy, in their 8th year of marriage, would lie about where she was spending a weekend. He deliberately slowed his pace. There was no point in hurrying. He made coffee and took it to his wife's workspace in the dining room. She wouldn't wake up for at least another hour. He grabbed her laptop, which was now protected by a password he didn't know. Randy, however, was forgetful and lazy. Hank looked through the small writing desk and found the password scroll on a scrap of paper in a drawer. Once he gained access, he discovered that she hadn't even closed her email browser. She had simply shut down her computer, relying on the new password and her confidence that Hank wouldn't invade her privacy. All assumptions that existed in this family until this morning no longer applied. Hank thought it was true. Everything had changed. She had been meeting with him. He looked through a small writing desk and found the password scroll on a scrap of paper in a drawer. Once he gained access, he discovered that she hadn't even closed her email browser. She had simply shut down her computer, relying on the new password and her confidence that Hank wouldn't invade her privacy. All assumptions that existed in this family until this morning no longer applied. Hank thought it was true. Everything had changed. She had been meeting with her ex-boyfriend from college, Josh Turner, at his house in Boulder on weekends when Josh's wife was away. Randy's boyfriend from college, Josh Turner, used to meet him at his house in Boulder on weekends when Josh's wife was away. Josh had broken Randy's heart by falling in love with and marrying another woman. Over the years, it seemed that he had developed guilt about abandoning Randy, or perhaps it was simply longing. The emails Hank found didn't contain many details, mostly just confirmation of arrival times. I guess they poured their hearts out to each other over the phone. What an interesting fact. It turned out that her parents and sister knew about it and agreed to cover for her affair. This wasn't in the emails but in the chats, which, they were also open. They all thought she should have married Josh, whose family had money. Hank was simply stunned. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. He took a deep breath to calm down. Otherwise, he might have punched holes in the drywall. After stewing himself, he called the hospital in Boulder. When the operator answered, he instinctively asked if Turner was a patient. When they requested his relationship with Mr. Turner, he claimed to be a friend. The operator then said she could not provide any information. This response confirmed for Hank that they did have a patient named Josh Turner. He called the number left in his voicemail. It was a direct line to the hospital's admissions department. After introducing himself, the clerk told him that Randy had been admitted with 3rd-degree burns over more than 80% of her body, including lung damage from smoke inhalation. The fire had apparently erupted. Out of the blue in a drought-stricken area, the fire had spread quickly due to high winds and blocked the only escape route. Over 100 homes had been burned and destroyed. "Sorry," said Hank. "This can't be my wife. She's in Jacksonville, Florida. You must have the wrong information." He hung up, said the other person on the call. "Yes, of course she was in Boulder. I know." He wasn't going to make it easy for anyone. He looked again at his wife's computer and found Josh's social media page. Randy had indeed added him as a friend on his page. Hank found Josh's wife, Tina. She had posted publicly from her family's home in San Diego, asking for prayers, because she had just learned her husband had been in the hospital with severe burns. It was time to get some answers from the God of vengeance, Hank thought as he messaged Josh's wife in the chat to introduce himself and share what he had discovered. He left his phone number a while later. As he finished his coffee, he saw another Hank got a missed call from someone he didn't recognize. There was a voicemail from Josh's wife, Tina. He called her back. Mrs. Turner, are you really called Tina? Yes, she said. When I married Josh, there was always the worry that this would happen with the woman he rejected. I married for love. It's a complete mess. You must be Randy's husband. Yes, I knew about Josh. When Randy and I met, she was so calm. I didn't notice anything. You're handling this very calmly, Hank. How are you managing that you're speaking calmly too? He countered. I'm taking pills. Tina admitted Josh is severely. They've already put him in a medically induced coma. I lost my composure when I heard that. Now I'm just in shock, especially knowing the truth about what really happened. What's your wife's situation? She's severely burned. That's all I know. I told them it couldn't be her because my wife is in Florida. Tina laughed. Oh, the hospital is calling again. Let me answer and let's keep in touch. She hung up and Hank saved her number in his contacts to ensure the spam blocker wouldn't send the call to voicemail. Another call came in. This time it was from Randy's father, Bob. I bet he saw the news and got worried, Hank said. There was a short pause. Pop never liked Hank, and Hank felt the same way, but they always acted politely to each other. Now, Bob wasn't bothering with that. Hank, have you heard anything from Randy or Hank Paul? This question must have been hard for Bob to ask. Morally speaking, why would I hear? From her, isn't she upstairs in her old room spending time with you, your cantankerous wife, and your other idiot daughter? Bob realized that Hank knew. He sighed. She really does love you, he said. I know we've never gotten along. I've always known you didn't like me. You thought I wasn't good enough for your daughter, but Josh was your wife, and your other daughter treated me like some sneaky intruder. I tolerated it to keep the peace, but that's over now. Let me make this clear, if you were. If I were standing in front of you right now, I would do something to you that you can't even imagine. After that, I deal with both of those women just for fun. So, you and your lying damn family, you pathetic damn bastards. Hank on up, there was nothing more to say to save time. He blocked Bob's number as well as his mother's. In-laws and sister-in-law. Law's numbers, Dad? Why are you shouting? Nicole asked as she entered the kitchen. Her younger sister Rebecca followed her. Daddy said a bad word, Rebecca announced. Really, Nick? I didn't hear it, Hank replied with a smile. What was the bad word, Becky? I can't remember, she replied, looking disappointed. You must have misheard. Let's have breakfast. Today is pancake day. On day 3, the girls ate pancakes with orange juice. Then they went off to watch cartoons, as it was Saturday morning, and they liked Bubble Guppies. Hank hoped these cartoons would lead to something more substantial, like Pinky and the Brain, Arenas and Ferb. Rye called again. It was a difficult situation. The pills weren't working. What pills? Hank asked. The pills I was taking to calm down aren't working. Why do you say that? I was on speakerphone at the hospital, connected to the ICU where Josh is. The nurse put me on speakerphone thinking it might help him to hear my voice, even though he's in a coma. Then I lost it. I yelled that his girlfriend was also badly burned and would probably die. I said that after we get the life insurance payouts, we should go on a cruise and spend all our time having sex with each other until we were numb, just to get even. Hank laughed despite himself, and his heart nearly stopping when he heard me. He's in a coma, but you're kidding. It's hard to tell if my yelling caused it. Or maybe it was just a coincidence, but he made it through. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what? Sorry that his heart nearly stopped? Or sorry that he's still alive? Hank's instincts are towards cruelty, but he controlled himself. I'm just sorry that it all turned out this way. Me too, she replied softly after a moment of silence. Hank asked, Tell me about this cruise we're going on. Sorry, I'm not sure where that came from, but I'm curious. I bet you are, she said, her voice tinged with amusement. Are you really interested? Hank smiled faintly. Do I have a chance? I don't know, she answered slowly. It's just that since I found out he was cheating, I've spent a lot of time wondering what's wrong with me. Knowing that you're interested makes me feel a little better. You don't look so bad yourself, by the way. Thanks, Hank said, chuckling. It's nice to hear. Even if my wife clearly preferred your husband, maybe the problem isn't us. I'm starting to think that too, Tana said after another pause. Have you ever wondered why they did it? I suppose it's because they thought they could have sex on the side and get away with it. It's all so simple. Well, what else could it be? Tina, listen, we both have a lot to process, but let's stay in touch. We're the only two people who understand what the other is feeling right now. Agreed. I need to buy Bermuda shorts on Amazon for the cruise and swim trunks, she joked, giggling softly. At least you're making me feel better, Hank said. Maybe the pills are working after all. Get a cabin with a balcony, she said, laughing again. Goodbye, goodbye. They hung up moments later. Hank got another voicemail from the hospital. He called back and was connected to a nurse in Rye's room. She put him on speakerphone too. It was probably a different nurse from the one caring for Josh, but they seemed to follow the same set of protocols. Hello, Mr. Henry Becker, the nurse said. Yes, Hank replied. I'm Nurse Young. We're on speakerphone right now in the burn unit intensive care. Your wife is here. She's severely burned and in a medically UC'd coma. She's next. Hank thought that after today, the hospital might need to update their standard procedures for dealing with a patient's family. He asked why he wasn't there when she was brought in. Nurse Young explained that one of my colleagues was there. She said your wife gripped her hand tightly and wouldn't let go until they understood what she was demanding. Call my husband. I'm so sorry. My wife fought the team with all her strength and wouldn't let them do anything until they promised they'd deliver the message okay. It was too little, too late, thought Hank. What should I say? She said, say whatever is in your heart. The nurse said, all right. Hank yelled into the phone. Listen, you pathetic, cheat, dirty creature. I hope you die in agony and spend eternity in hell with Josh, who's also going to die. Just so you know, I'm going to use the life insurance money to seduce Josh's wife. I'll never forgive you. The line went dead. The nurse must not have been paying attention. I should have mentioned it first, but it seems she snapped out of it quickly. Hank realized that this wasn't the way to achieve peace of mind. One day he might feel some guilt for saying all this, but today wasn't that day. Daddy, what does seduce mean? Asked Becky, holding her teddy bear. Hank froze. My little ones, it means to deceive. Becky thought about this with a serious expression. When is Mummy coming home? This really angered him. He should have thought it through carefully, but he wasn't in the mood. As soon as she can, Becky, he thought. He went back to the living room and watched as she plopped down in front of the TV. There was no way he was going to take the girls to Colorado to see their mother wrapped in bandages like a mummy. He didn't want to. Hank had to think fast. He booked tickets for a week at Disneyland, a reservation at one of Mickey's hotels and plane tickets. They were leaving the next morning. Nick would have to miss some kindergarten, but that was okay. Just as he received the tickets, the hospital called back. This time they told him that Randy had suffered a heart attack and died despite all efforts to save her. Hank asked when it had happened. It was exactly when he had. He suggested she try yelling at Josh again. No, she should handle it herself. In the end, Hank had to send Rye's medical insurance information to the hospital so they could provide the death certificate. He called the local funeral home and arranged for her cremation. Considering the burns, Hank wondered if he might get a discount, but they informed him it would still be full price. He asked them to make the ashes available to him after they returned from Disneyland. The girls were sad that their mom wasn't with them, but they perked up with lots of sweets from the Bid Bitey boutique. They spent hours riding attractions and meeting characters. The girls watched fireworks every night before collapsing exhausted but happy into their beds. Joss held on until Thursday. Tina didn't yell at him anymore, so maybe that helped him stick around after his death. Tina went back to Colorado and stayed with friends since her house had burned down. Tina acted like a noble widow for her children. She told Hank that she hadn't explained Ryan's involvement to them. Tina's kids were older than Hank's, and they knew their father had been hurt in the fire. This made it harder for her to avoid difficult conversations. Hank's daughters, however, had no idea for a while. He continued, as he had been still not saying anything bad about their mother. It wasn't easy. Shortly after they returned from California, a delivery guy came to the door. There were 2 items requiring signatures: a letter from Rye's relatives and a box containing her ashes. The letter from her relatives requested that Randy's remains be sent to her hometown in Florida so that they could organize a memorial service and funeral. If Hank didn't want to arrange something locally, they must have been calling someone else. Hank realized that the letter did not contain any apologies for covering for Rye's lies. This fact made his next decision easier. He hired a Hank invited a teenage girl from the neighborhood to visit and left the girls at home. They were busy showing the babysitter all their new stuff and photos from the Disney trip on the tablet with the ashes packed in a bag. Hank drove to a nearby national park and headed to one of the more remote areas of the park. He went to a site equipped with pit toilets made of cinder blocks instead of proper bathrooms. There, he dumped the ashes into the toilet and snapped a photo as he did so. On the way back to his car, he thought that therapy might be a good idea, but the thing was he wasn't angry anymore. At least not angry enough to hit someone. Destroying a reputation was something else entirely. Later that day, he posted the video on social media, explaining what he had done and why. Afterward, he wondered if the National Park Service would issue him a fine for polluting the latrine. If so, he'd gladly pay it. He never contacted Rye's relatives again, but he saw in the newspaper said they'd held a memorial service in Jacksonville without him or his daughters. He told the girls that their mom had an accident while she was away and wouldn't be coming back. They took it as he'd expected. Fortunately, their kindergarten teachers were great and gave them support during the difficult time. The life insurance payout was substantial. It turned out that Randy had taken out more coverage than Hank had realized. The money made it easier for him to. He decided to restructure his life. He knew his daughters needed more fresh air, especially at playgrounds with lots of kids and pretty young mothers. Many of these women were sympathetic to his tragic story. He left out the part about Randy's infidelity. Sympathy was better than pity. Before long, the girls were getting invited to plenty of playdates where the mums would introduce Hank to their cute single friends. Slowly, Hank began to see a way forward. He never met Tina Turner in person, though. Despite everything, they still spoke on the phone from time to time. Their shared pain offered a strange kind of solace. Hank's daughters were happy and unaware of the full story. For him, the road ahead was clearer now, with new possibilities. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. If you haven't already, feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.